Have you ever wondered, ever wondered?
Dr. Frederick Luskin is the author of the best-selling Forgive for Good and Forgive for Love, and is one of the world's leading researchers and teachers on the subject of forgiveness. He is the director of the Stanford Forgiveness Project, a series of research projects that have used and validated his forgiveness methods. He is a lecturer in wellness at the Stanford University School of Medicine, and he is a department chair of clinical psychology at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. Thank you for being here, Fred. I'm just honored and delighted to have you.
You're very kind, and thank you. Thank you for those very warm, thankful emails. You know, none of us have any idea if what we're doing is of use to anybody. You know what I'm saying?
I have a big story with your work and how it really gave me a new lease on life, Fred. I don't know what I'd have done if I hadn't found your books. Jason was killed in a really horrific, they sent these kids into a sort of a suicide mission. There were 9 of them that were killed. And so without all of your books, all 3 of them. And Fred, I went on to teach. Actually, the Army has a program called the Resilience Program where I went to teach teachers who then go out to parents who'd lost their children. And I used all your stuff and some of Robert Enright's stuff. And I always talked about you in the classes and told these teachers, you have to get Fred's books because I can give this little seminar, but the real meat is in this stuff. You're a hero of mine. So I just wanted to say that. And I attribute my ability to heal, and there's still times I cry and hurt over the loss of him, but to come back to a place of where I was before, a person who loved life and had joy.
That's all forgiveness is, You went to Mars and then you come back to Earth.
Yes.
And Mars is a really shitty place to look from. Anyway, thank you for inviting me. And I'm sorry what happened to your son. And, life has a lot of shit for a lot of people.
So, Fred, I want to start out with some, I think, fascinating in your books. You talk a little bit about the road that led you to study forgiveness at Stanford. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I mean, there were a couple of streams, Carly. One was a long-standing kind of hippie-inspired interest in yoga and meditation and natural foods. I mean, I was there when a lot of that stuff started, and it stuck with me. So through my life, I had like alternative, spiritual, more than religious kind of ideals. And when I was looking for a dissertation topic at Stanford, I wanted to find something that would touch both the religious/spiritual and the scientific, because I'm at Stanford. I had to do a fully science-based thing. And so that was one theme. The other was not that long before I got into Stanford, I had been devastatingly hurt by a very dear friend, and that hurt paralyzed me for a number of years. I mean, part of me just stopped. Like I certainly stopped progressing. A big part of me just got walled off inside in a kind of shock. Parts of me still function, but there was this just dead zone in there, and it was filled with loss and kind of rage, and I didn't know what to do with it. I mean, it was just that simple. And maybe, I can't remember because it's so long ago, but 2-3 years after this happened, my wife came to me one day and said, Fred, I still really love you. I just don't like you as much. You're just you're, you're less than I thought you were, is what she said. She said, I have no doubt that what happened to you was devastating. That's accurate. But this is years later. Grow up. What happened in that interim of, like, basically, holy shit, somebody's calling me on this and I need to grow up, is I started investigating, like, what the hell would that mean? Like, grow up. I thought I was a grown up. I was a parent. I had a job. But she pointed out that I had a part of me that was so underdeveloped that I couldn't handle mistreatment without being an absolute baby. And so that pushed to me. And all of a sudden, this kind of idea of forgiveness like popped into my worldview. It wasn't there before because I felt so justified in being angry and bitter. So why would I forgive? I mean, it was his fault, his this, his that, and anything I do got a pass.
Wow. Yep.
And my wife was saying, you no longer get a pass. So forgiveness, like all of a sudden, like I got the memo, which probably had been lying around for like years, but that memo forced me to look at things. And that began my own evolution. And the things that I learned that rescued me from my pit when my dissertation study was available, I took that and experimented with it as part of my study to see, well, look, it helped me. Maybe it would help other people. So that's the best I can give you in 3 minutes around what this is.
Yes. And from that, that's when you brought the participants from Ireland, the Catholics and the Protestants, right? And the Stanford Forgiveness Project came from that.
That was a few years later. My dissertation was completed. We wrote a grant to get money for a big project. We got the grant. That project was initiated. It was useful. That project got some play on Stanford's internal press, and a minister on campus who was active in Northern Ireland diplomacy called me and said, what do you think about trying your forgiveness stuff with some folks that I know in Northern Ireland who've had their children murdered, and their like antagonisms on both sides of the conflict are an obstacle for both sides to move forward. So maybe we could do a demonstration project and show that people can forgive even this horror as a pathway to peace. So that's how that came about.
And then the Stanford Forgiveness Project, was that after that?
The Stanford Forgiveness Project was the name we gave to the grant that got us a project big enough. Almost every piece of forgiveness work except that particular study is small. There's very little funding for things like forgiveness, but we got a grant, so we were literally the only group able to do a big, well-run research project. We had 260 participants, so we were able to show in a way literally no one else has, that forgiveness is an effective intervention. And then we kept that name because it's a great name, and have conducted other, again, small projects since, because the funding was only available once.
What were some of the things you discovered if a person doesn't forgive? like it affects your physiological body. And what are some of the things you found will happen if you hold on to that anger and bitterness?
Well, you personally know what happens, right? Your body tightens up. Like you don't walk through life with a sense of safety. So you can almost feel your muscles tightening to protect you. And you can feel your nervous system on a higher alert because you're not safe. And you feel your mind filled with all sorts of thoughts of threat and danger and antagonism. Those things take a toll,
Yes. Yes.
So yes, your mind does become cloudier, and you do lose some of your ability to think critically, and you can raise your blood pressure, and you can create stress related damage to your body, and you can lower your immune system, all because the unresolved grudge keeps alive a sense of threat. And your body responds to that sense of threat. And if it lasts 10 years, that ain't good for you.
You and I were talking a little bit earlier, and I have a huge debt of gratefulness to you because I lost my son in Afghanistan in the war. And afterwards, I was so angry. I spent, at least a year just really, really angry and bitter. And I found your work. I found Forgive for Good, and it sort of saved my life. It did, Fred, because I read it and I was like, you know what? I owe him to return to the mom who raised him, the woman who raised him. I have two other daughters, and one had a baby. And I thought, I can't cheat them from being present by staying in this grief. And I went on to study your work, and then I put together a forgiveness seminar that I then gave down in San Antonio to teachers. They have a program the Army does, a resiliency it's called, that these teachers would go out to parents who lost children. And the first thing I said is, buy Fred Luskin's work, his Forgive for Good. Like I said, I used a lot of your research to put together this program. It was just one seminar, but it just saved my life. And I was able to work through the different steps that you suggest. And so let's talk about some of those, because they were so incredibly effective for me. And so you have you have 9 steps that you use. This is for self-forgiveness, which I had to do a lot of self-forgiveness because I blame myself for Jason even going to the war. So you talk about know exactly how you feel. So let's start with that.
Let me back you up just to one thing you said is you intuited something that is missing from most of the discussion on resilience, that it's almost impossible to be resilient if you don't have a capacity to forgive the hurtful parts of your life. That it's inherent in our ability to keep on going, to not let the crap overly burden us. It's inherent in that, but it's not talked about. And one of the reasons it's not talked about is forgiveness was so tied up with religion for so long. It doesn't have a secular or scientific veneer. And people like me and others have tried to take it out of the religious domain and put it in the middle of any other coping. But you understood something that, no, you can't really be fully resilient if you don't acknowledge how wounded you are and be willing to let it go. So that's an important part. Now, you asked me about the first step, which is know how you feel. We have to grieve our losses and hurts before we forgive them. So you can't rush from disaster to forgiveness in 2 hours. That's not how the human being works. The human being needs to integrate what happened, painful things like the loss of your son, needs to integrate it into your worldview and into your experience so you can hold it and use it moving forward with some positive purpose. What too many of us do because we don't want to grieve is we either stay angry for our whole lives or we just push it away. It's like, well, they're just bad people. This is a terrible thing. I'm not going to think about it anymore. But real forgiveness comes from like really digging in and knowing what it is that harmed you, what was wrong, what I felt. It's owning so that you have a power when you let it go. So you can go in front of people with your true story and say to them, I've been to hell and back, and it's possible you can do that. And you need that before you have enough power to, which forgiveness frees you from needing to stay in hell. But you need to acknowledge that you were there.
And another point that I love in your work is understanding what forgiveness is. I think some people don't understand. They think, oh, I'm going to have to go and get involved with this person again. I'd love to have you define forgiveness.
Carly, I realized maybe 6 to 9 months after starting our projects that a good percentage of what I was actually doing was just what you just said, letting people know what forgiveness is and isn't. They were so misguided and so wrong about it and had been badly taught by their religious experiences about forgiveness that simply educating them helped a good number of people doing it. So knowing it's internal, it's for you, it's like about your healing. It's not whether the world comes to you and says they're sorry or somebody else goes mea culpa. It's to release yourself from the bitterness and blame that you have around life. The other thing is it doesn't mean you have to go back and hug somebody who was terrible to you. You can say no thank you. It's like, and the third is you can still sue people and try to get them arrested, but you do so without bitterness and vengeance. You do it for real justice. It's like if somebody does wrong, there are very reasonable, natural consequences that seeking justice is a good thing. So we used to tell people all the time, so many of our, let's say, people were women whose ex-husbands had been terrible and didn't pay child support or did all sorts of terrible things. So we would tell them, forgive the guy, but make sure he pays child support.
Yes, it's like two different things, and I think people tie them together and then they think, well, there's no way that I'm going to. And also, you're not going to get an apology a lot of times. So if you wait for that, you're never going to be at the place where you actually can forgive.
Well, and when we were thinking through deeply what we wanted to do for this project, we asked ourselves, what do you do if you have to forgive a dead person? Mom or grandmother. They're not going to apologize. So we had to deeply recognize that forgiveness was independent of getting something from somebody else. And that was a tangible learning.
And that life isn't always going to be fair. I love your sort of really common sense approach to this. It's like we're all going to go through pain in this world, and one of the things I actually heard you speak the other day on YouTube, but you were talking about how we need to live in the moment. Like if you're bitter and you're not forgiving, you're living in the past, or you're projecting into the future that you're going to get an apology or that something's going to happen to make you feel like this person they got their karma. It's not the way that we can live in the moment and be joyful. So it kills joy, right?
Well, and that's what the process of forgiveness enables. It's when we're unforgiving. And I've been, long after that friend did it, I've had other people treat me badly. It's not like it stops with one thing. What the key thing is, grievances and unforgivenesses, they're looking back. What life is in the present and looking forward. And so as long as you're looking back, you're stuck. You're just stuck. And if you blame anything for your being stuck, then you're cementing in being stuck.
And some of the pathways you talked about, that when people continually stay in that state, it becomes a habit, maybe habitual. And there are certain parts of our brain that light up when we're angry. And so if we stay there, it's going to be a habit like any other habit in this life.
And that's one of the other things that we did to secularize forgiveness and make it available. Unforgiveness is just a habit. It's held together in part by conditioning, like your mind gets used to getting upset when you think about X. So you have to break that habit. Making it tangible like that has made it easier for folks to want to do it. And I'm not arguing against any religious point. We decided to secularize the whole game so that I could go to the law schools and medical schools and just talk about this.
Well, it opens it up to the whole world then. It's not just this, the segment of religious folks or whatever. And that's so needed. What are some of the steps that a person can do that they find themselves in this habit of anger and bitterness? What are some of the steps in your seminars that you have them do?
One of the other pieces of this that you didn't mention that's preparatory is you need to recognize that no matter what it was that you're upset, whatever it happened, whether you screwed up or the world screwed up or God screwed up, whatever, whenever you think it happened, the only time that you can change it is right now. So if what bothered me is from 2006 or 8 or 10, it doesn't matter, because right now doing things that keep it alive in me now. That's the strongest understanding of how we either keep this going or end it. Doing something now, either thinking in a certain way or feeling in a certain way or having a body reaction in a certain way that keeps this sense of me as a victim alive. So all of our forgiveness stuff is aimed at right now changing that victim status to something where, it's 2023 and my life had very painful things and very wonderful things. And right now, what's happening? Like, I'm not dominated by this negative experience. So the first thing that we teach people, once you get that present-centered things, is to start being more grateful for what you have, to reduce the obsession with the thing that you don't have. And having done research with people who have had their children murdered, we did a research, not full research project, but we went in after the attacks of 9/11 and did some forgiveness work with people who had their family members killed in that violence. And I've also gone to Colombia and done work after their civil war and Sierra Leone, whatever. But if you only look at where life has harmed you, you have a very disjointed picture of reality. And in order to make peace, you have to see reality more clearly, which is even as simple as, hey, I woke up this morning and I have breakfast. What a good thing. While there's 800 million people who don't have any food, I had breakfast. Or, I live in a house with running water. Hey, this is a plus. Or it's sunny out. It doesn't matter. You just need to train your brain to not be so overusing the wound to start your day and orient your attention. So gratitude is one. The second is when you're upset, you need to calm yourself down. It doesn't matter what you do. If you want to knit, if you want to walk outside, if you want to have a drink of water, we teach breathing practices. It doesn't matter. The key piece is when you're upset, instead of going off into the habit of upset, calm down. So you've created a different foundation, one where gratitude is playing also. You're calmed down, so all of a sudden now you can think.
And talk about the grievance story, changing your grievance story. I think that's do you actually have people sort of write out this was my grievance story?
Probably 10 years after starting to teach this stuff, we came to understand that forgiveness may even be simpler than we thought, that it is essentially changing your story. You can't just go straight ahead and change the story. That does not work. You have to do some other thing. But essentially, forgiveness is a rewrite inside of our brains that goes from the world screwed me over, it's unfair, nobody has suffered the way I have, whatever, to I suffered. So does everybody else. Now what? And that is transformative because once the story changes, you're now flooding your body with stress chemicals every time you think of this thing.
I know for a while after Jason died, I was so angry, I felt sort of justified. And if I don't if I don't spend a certain amount of time really angry, then I'm not doing him justice. To do him justice is to embrace life now and enjoy his sisters and live life to the fullest.
One thing I will say, though, is it's healthy to be that angry for a while. You were devastatingly, your whole world changed. So how could you not be angry at having to adjust to such a massive alteration of your life? If you weren't angry, it's because you're not paying attention.
Yeah, that's true.
So anger is essential for a while. It's a placeholder. It allows us to integrate and deal with things that are too big to take in at one time. So anger is part of our defense, and thank God for it. Otherwise, we'd be overwhelmed. The problem is when anger becomes a habit or a default, then we're limited to just anger, and then we start to deteriorate.
And don't you think that then it bleeds into every aspect of your life? Then you're more angry if somebody cuts you off. You have this sort of persona of anger, and that then, like I said, bleeds into every aspect of whether you can love again, whether you can give again, trust again. I think it affects us in a deep level on all levels of our life.
The wonderful statement of Desmond Tutu, like without forgiveness, there is no future. And that is so crucial in this whole thing. Do you want your life to be a replay of the past? Do you want your future to be dominated by the worst part of your past? Or do you want to be open to let life back in so you can create a different future? That is the crucial question, and the story is your answer to that.
Do you think, too, we have a society that seems filled with grievances right now? Everybody's, not everybody, a lot of people have these grievances towards politics and this and that. And it frightens me a little bit to see
Me too.
how pervasive this grievance stuff is, and it's your fault and somebody else's fault, and there's no responsibility. That's another thing I love about your work is like you talk about it's time to take responsibility as an adult, face it and say, I'm responsible for my anger and my grievances, and I need to get to the bottom of them.
I get frightened too by the overuse of grievance and victimhood for social power. As I said, there's nothing wrong with identifying where it is you might have been harmed or victimized. What is not useful either for individuals or families or cultures is to make that the prevailing narrative, because it locks in the people who did it, or you think they did it. It doesn't give you any room to reevaluate who they are and who you are, because I'm stuck in a one down position. And that helplessness intensifies the anger. So you see that all over our culture.
And it gives your power away. You're no longer the navigator of your soul and your life. It's the grievance, it's the anger that is in charge.
Well, not just grievance and anger, and I'm sure you recognize it, there's often a full dose of self-pity. And that combination, let me tell you, is not pretty. The last piece that I will add is that the one other thing, so we talk about gratitude and managing your physiology and reactivity, usually through some stress management thing, changing the story. But the one other piece is some kind of cognitive, I call them unenforceable rules, but some kind of cognitive thing where you remind yourself that, as the Rolling Stones said, I don't always get what I want. And if I spend too much time like simply arguing with the fact that I think I should get what I want, life goes by and I feel more and more dissatisfied. So the unenforceable rules, they trigger us like, I have to get this, I have to get that, I must get this. They trigger us to be defensive. When you add a little more gratitude, you spend a little more time saying thank you. So you're not just so dominated by no thank you, I don't want this. And so that unenforceable rule is just a simple way of you're stuck in traffic, you're late, you start getting pissed off, but then you recognize, I don't control how many people come onto the freeway. That's the unenforceable rule. So those are the four basic, simple practices that we teach people to back off a little bit from how outraged you are by how your own life unfolded.
That's beautiful. And I want to thank you again for your work and how it has changed my life. And I know many thousands and thousands of people. So thank you, Fred, and bless your work. Are you still giving seminars?
No, I used to teach a lot here, and there's only so much that I could take of human, not just suffering as much as of also hearing how badly human beings treat each other. So I do less of that than I did because I mean it's 30 years now, so enough. But I still do some, and in a lowered amount, I still can stay fresh and not just enjoy what I do because that's not the point, but to believe that what I'm doing is helpful. You have to be careful because there's no end of human mistreatment. So yes, I do some. I do more teaching now, particularly at Stanford, on helping people be happier. It's the same material, but on the other end of the spectrum. And I do teach resilience, but I do notice how many people would be helped if somebody would just whisper in their ear, you'll go further in this life if you would forgive it and let it go.
I know you said you sometimes wonder about the impact, but I'm telling you, you had a huge impact on me and a lot of people that I know that I've recommended your books.
Do you still teach that class?
I don't. I taught in DC. I taught that. I taught some writing classes too, but forgiveness classes and some happiness classes. But like you said, the happiness and the forgiveness, they're like this. You're not going to be happy if you're hanging on to stuff.
They really are like this. It's amazing because once you've been there, like you've been there, you completely understand that you can't really be happy unless you learn to forgive. You can't. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred. Bless you. Thank you for joining me today for my interview with Dr. Frederick Luskin. If you'd like to know more about Fred's work, open my website at haveyourewonderedpodcast.com and look under guests.
Have you ever